An ultimatum for Putin. He was given 10 hours to decide, either peace or sanctions. She betrayed Putin. China is joining the pressure on Russia regarding ending the war. Macron and Merz were accused of drug use. A sensational statement by a Russian diplomat. Poland shamefully expelled Russian diplomats from Krakow. Hell on the front. The Russians sent Putin's elite presidential regiment to storm Chasiv Yar. The spy scandal between Hungary and Ukraine is escalating. A Ukrainian diplomat was harshly detained in Budapest. Hello, my name is Katerina Pakalchuk, and before we begin, please subscribe to our channel. Like this video if we've caught your interest. Things are about to get heated. Could it really be that negotiations between Ukraine and Russia will take place in Turkey? On May 10th, Volodymyr Zelensky, together with European leaders, delivered an ultimatum to Putin. Either Russia agrees to a comprehensive and unconditional ceasefire starting Monday, or it will face a new package of sanctions from Europe and America.
The ceasefire must be comprehensive in the air, at sea, and on land. The ceasefire must last for 30 days.
After that, the Russian dictator made a statement in which he avoided giving a direct answer as to whether Russia agreed to the truce, but proposed to start direct peace talks with Ukraine and Turkey, and scheduled a meeting in Istanbul for this Thursday.
Right now, there are active hostilities, a war, and we are proposing to resume negotiations that were not interrupted by us. Those who truly want peace cannot help but support this.
Trump responded to this on social media, stating that Ukraine should immediately agree to negotiations with Russia and Turkey.
Russian President Putin does not want to sign a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodshed. Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At the very least, they will be able to determine whether an agreement is possible. And if not, European leaders and the United States will know where things stand and will be able to act accordingly.
In response, Zelensky announced that he would arrive in Turkey on Thursday and hopes that Putin will also come for the negotiations.
I will be in Turkey this Thursday, May 15th, and I am expecting Putin in Turkey, in person. And I hope that this time, Putin will not look for excuses as to why he can't do something. We are ready to talk in order to end the war. Thursday, Turkey.
The Guardian writes that Zelensky has seized the initiative from Putin and is now putting pressure on him. At the same time, the publication claims that Putin's tone during his speech was clearly carefully calibrated to reject Europe's demands, but also to create the appearance of a constructive position by Moscow in the eyes of the Trump administration, which until recently had been much softer toward Moscow than toward Kyiv. At the same time, Putin specifically thanked the new U.S. administration for its efforts to resolve the conflict.
Trump's reaction indicates that this tactic may have worked, dealing a significant blow to Western unity. However, his post on Truth Social also hinted at the frustration he has reportedly expressed privately in recent days over Moscow's tough demands regarding the war in Ukraine.
At the same time, The Times writes that during negotiations, Putin will demand Ukraine's capitulation, not a fair peace agreement. These demands from Russia include changing the Ukrainian government, a legal renunciation of joining NATO, and territorial concessions, specifically handing over Crimea and 4 more regions, including the major cities of Kherson and Zaporizhia, which the Russians do not even control. In addition, against the backdrop of the firm determination of European allies to guarantee the observance of a ceasefire in Ukraine by deploying a military contingent on its territory, the Kremlin has made a new statement. Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated in an interview that Russia is opposed.
The deployment of peacekeepers on Russia's historical territories threatens to trigger World War III. As for the discussion about placing so-called military contingents on the territory of Ukraine, yes, this is absolutely unacceptable to us. This poses a critical danger to the security of all of Europe and the world.
Europe also wants to join the peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. However, they say that first, a ceasefire must be achieved. This was stated by the head of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot.
Jean-Noël Barrot, the unanimous call from Europeans and Ukrainians, supported by the Americans, for an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, starting on Monday, has prompted Vladimir Putin to take a step in the right direction. This is good, and we are ready, starting next Thursday, to begin negotiations that will lead to a lasting peace in Ukraine. The last time we did this was in Istanbul in 2022. That attempt ended in failure, and it did not stop Vladimir Putin from committing the massacre in Bucha, which shocked the entire world. So yes, to peace negotiations, but first there must be a ceasefire.
However, if there is no ceasefire, there will be increased pressure on Putin.
Jean-Noël Barrot, we have the ability to impose large-scale sanctions that will have a devastating impact on the Russian economy. The sanctions imposed by Europeans against the Russian economy over the past 3 years have already cost Vladimir Putin 400 billion euros, or the equivalent of 3 years of the military budget.
And when it comes to pressure, these are not empty statements. The editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, citing his own sources, writes that Europe is already running out of patience. And if Russia does not cease fire today, a tough response is just around the corner.
The source says that Europe's position has not changed. If Russia attacks tomorrow, expect a decisive response from Europe and the United States of America, including sanctions, as agreed on Saturday.
The European countries themselves are also confirming plans to increase sanctions pressure. A spokesperson for the German government stated that Germany has issued an ultimatum to Putin. If he does not respond to the ceasefire proposal by the end of the day, sanctions will be imposed against Russia.
The clock is ticking. We have 12 hours left until the end of this day. If a ceasefire is not established by then, the European side will begin preparing sanctions.
Putin's response here is, of course, obvious. He will not agree to a reasonable peace. Therefore, as the Ukrainian publication European Pravda writes, on May 20th, the EU Council will adopt the 17th package of sanctions against Russia. It recently became known that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is also traveling to Turkey. This was stated in a release by the U.S. State Department. And most interestingly, even Beijing has joined in putting pressure on Putin. A spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that they support the 30-day ceasefire proposed by Ukraine, Europe, and the U.S. Now, the ball is in the Kremlin's court. So what do you think? Place your bets. Will Putin go to Turkey or will he chicken out? And what do you think will come out of these negotiations? Share your thoughts in the comments. It'll be interesting to read. Perhaps China's unexpected stance in supporting a 30-day ceasefire in the war in Ukraine is connected to a slight thaw in the economic war between the U.S. and China. Washington and Beijing have agreed to a 90-day trade truce.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and a significant reduction in tariff rates. Both sides will mutually reduce their tariffs by 115%.
The mutual and crippling customs tariffs are being suspended for 3 months. Beijing will lower tariffs on American goods from 125% to 10%, while Washington in turn will reduce tariffs on Chinese goods from 145% to 30%. The news of the trade truce has already shaken global markets. Oil and cryptocurrency have surged. And while the entire civilized world is discussing the results of the meeting in Kyiv between Zelensky, Macron, Merz, Starmer, and Tusk, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is busy creating fakes. And this time, they're not lying about the content of the statements. Just imagine, the spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, is seriously claiming that on their way to Ukraine, the President of France, the Prime Minister of Britain, and the Chancellor of Germany were using drugs.
A Frenchman, an Englishman, and a German got on a train and apparently got so high that they forgot to put away their gear, the packet and the spoon, before the journalists arrived.
Zakharova supports her suspicions with this video and this napkin, which she mistook for a packet of powder. This nonsense was also picked up by one of the main Kremlin propagandists, Margarita Simonian.
Experts point out that such a tiny spoon, which is too small to stir tea or eat jam, is called a snuff spoon. It's a spoon for cocaine, and common sense suggests that people only hide something so nervously and decisively when they're either 14 and hiding cigarettes from their mom, or 47 and hiding cocaine from the public.
In my opinion, this is one of the dumbest fakes. Well, it's obvious that it's a napkin, and Macron was just tidying up the table, not trying to hide anything. The accusations were also addressed by Emmanuel Macron's administration. They say this has gone too far.
When European unity becomes inconvenient, disinformation goes so far as to turn an ordinary napkin into drugs. These fake news stories are spread by France's enemies both abroad and at home. We must remain vigilant against manipulation.
And alongside this, the same photos are published with captions. This is a napkin to wipe your hands, and this is European unity to build peace. I wonder, is this how Russian vodka affects the brain? Are there any experts? Please explain in the comments. New sanctions are of course good, but Russia still gets everything it needs to manufacture weapons, despite the sanctions that are already in place. Yes, definitely at a higher cost, but still without any major problems. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine has shown a Russian missile that the occupiers are using to shell southern Ukraine. This is a new cruise missile called Banderol. So, this weapon contains at least 20 foreign components manufactured in China, Japan, South Korea, and even the United States. What does that mean? Nothing personal, just business. It would be interesting to find out how that happened. Russian diplomats, time to leave. Poland is closing the Russian consulate in Krakow and declaring all Kremlin consuls persona non grata. Russia received this diplomatic slap because of accusations of setting fire to a shopping center in Warsaw last year. The shopping center burned down completely. Almost immediately after, there was talk about Russia's involvement in the fire. A year into the investigation, the suspicions were confirmed. Russian special services were involved in the arson.
Based on the collected evidence, we know that the fire was the result of arson, carried out on the orders of Russian special services. We have detailed information about how the order and the arson were carried out, as well as how the perpetrators documented it. Their actions were organized and directed by an identified individual located in Russia.
But it seems to me that Poland's response is unlikely to be limited to just diplomatic measures. Personally, I support closing Russian consulates in all European countries because it is a terrorist state. Like this video if you agree with me. Don't agree? Leave a comment. Let's argue about it. Just last week, in a documentary about himself, Putin said that he sometimes keeps an eye out for a successor. But of course, the choice belongs to the people.
Are you thinking about this? What happens next? Who comes next?
Well, I always think about that. And ultimately, well, you can look at it however you want. But in the end, it's clear that there are campaign technologies, there are administrative resources, but still, in the final analysis, the choice belongs to the people, to the Russian people, to the citizens, to the voters. Someone who doesn't have the trust of the people behind them is unlikely to have any real chance to accomplish anything significant. This is an absolutely fundamental issue. So when I think about this, and I think about it constantly, of course, I believe that there should be a person, or better yet, several people, so that people have a choice who can earn this trust from the country's citizens, from the...
We all know that in Russia, elections are held without any real choice. But it seems that Putin has already made up his mind about his successor. Russian journalists report that the dictator's most likely choice has fallen on a certain Alexei Dumin, a former Putin bodyguard who is now the secretary of the Russian State Council.
Being chosen as a candidate is a tremendous vote of confidence from the president. I would like to assure you that I will do everything in my power to justify this trust and to earn the same respect and confidence from the residents of the region.
Dumin has previously commanded special operation forces that seized Crimea and organized the escape of then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. For this, he was even awarded the title of Hero of Russia. But Dumin has many other achievements on his record as well.
For many years, Dumin never left Putin's side day or night. He accompanied him on distant trips, protected him while in the taiga and even on the open sea, carried out the most delicate assignments, and was ready to risk his own life for him. The Russian dictator completely trusts his former bodyguard.
And it is precisely because Dumin, so to speak, is close to Putin's inner circle that the Russian dictator trusts him.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Negotiations are one thing, but the front is moving. We have discouraging news from the Donetsk region. Analysts report that the Russians have advanced near the settlements of Shribna and Vodyan Druhe. The Pokrovsk direction remains the hottest spot. There, in just one day, Ukrainian defenders managed to stop 70 assault and offensive actions by the aggressor. But the enemy plans to intensify the pressure even further and will not limit themselves to just one direction. Although, of course, it is obvious that their main goal is to capture the entire Donetsk region. For this purpose, according to Ivan Petriachak, spokesperson of the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade named after King Danilo, the occupiers are deploying elite troops for the assault, including the FSB Presidential Regiment. These are the attacks on Chasiv Yar. And again, it's not just about Donetsk region, because as stated by the deputy head of the President's office, former commander of the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade Kolodny Yar, Pavlo Palisa, the enemy also seeks to create a buffer zone in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions.
I think the enemy will focus its main efforts in the near future on reaching the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and on creating a so-called buffer zone on Ukrainian territory along the border in Kharkiv and Sumy regions. Also, with a high probability, they will try to break through the defenses in the Zaporizhzhia direction.
But Palisa also talks about attempts to cross the Dnipro in the Kherson region. We reported on preparations for this last week.
The enemy is starting preparations for an amphibious operation, and already several hundred ships have been spotted. Well, and the number mentioned was 300. We also see that there have been attempts to land troops on small islands, which are currently under the control of Ukraine's defense forces.
Unfortunately, the bad news doesn't end there. We have repeatedly told you about how our defense industry is developing, particularly in the field of unmanned systems. But Russia is not standing still either. And as the Financial Times writes, Russia is erasing Ukraine's advantage in drones.
Although Ukraine still has an advantage over Russia in terms of innovation. When it comes to production, however, Moscow has proven to be more efficient. This was warned by Alexander Yakovenko, founder and CEO of one of Ukraine's largest drone manufacturers, TEV Drones, according to the Financial Times. Russia is moving step by step. If things continue this way in another 2 years, we won't be able to keep up our defense, he stated. According to him, 2 years ago, Ukrainians were 2 steps ahead of the Russians, but now it's only 1 step.
But there is also good news. OSINT channels report that in Russia's Rilsk, a strike hit the location of the 40th Separate Marine Brigade of Russia.
There's a guy lying there, look, on the edge.
Where is he lying on the edge?
There, on the edge. See, he's moving?
Ah, we need to pull him out.
According to Russian telegram channels, the strike was carried out with a HIMARS, a like for our defenders for their accuracy. On May 9th, the Security Service of Ukraine announced that, for the first time in history, it had uncovered an agent network of Hungarian military intelligence that was conducting espionage activities to the detriment of Ukraine. And just a few days later, a former Ukrainian diplomat was harshly detained in the center of Budapest on charges of espionage. Next came outraged statements, mutual accusations, and promises not to stop the investigations. Veronika Yeremeyeva will now share the details of this espionage scandal between Ukraine and Hungary.
For the first time in Ukraine's history, the Security Service of Ukraine reports, under such a sensational headline, the detention and exposure of an agent network of Hungarian military intelligence that was spying against Ukraine.
The task of this cell was to gather information about the military security of the Zakarpattia region, to look for vulnerabilities in the region's ground and air defenses, as well as to study the socio-political views of local residents, including possible scenarios of their behavior if Hungarian troops were to enter the region.
As a result, the security service detained 2 agents from the Hungarian intelligence network in Zakarpattia. Their handler was a career officer of Hungarian military intelligence. One of his agents was a former Ukrainian serviceman who had been recruited back in 2021.
He met with a Hungarian intelligence officer and was recruited by him for a monetary reward. He passed on information in the military sphere.
However, the so-called activation of this agent only took place in 2024. The agent received his first assignment.
What would be the reaction of the military and the civilian population of Zakarpattia if a peacekeeping contingent, particularly Hungarian troops, were to enter the region? What military equipment and weapons can be purchased on the black market in Zakarpattia? What is the situation with the migration of the Hungarian population in the region? What military forces are stationed in Zakarpattia? Are there many vehicles and combat machines? How well staffed are the law enforcement agencies? And what is their head count, etc.?
After that, the agent personally scouted the deployment of defense forces and the coordinates of S-300 surface-to-air missile systems in the region. Another detainee, according to the SBU, is also a former servicewoman of the Security and Defense Forces of Ukraine, who left the unit only in 2025. Both have been charged under the article of state treason committed under martial law, and they face life imprisonment. It's clear that such a high-profile case is causing a huge public outcry, especially considering the particular affinity for the Kremlin shown by Hungarian politicians like Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó. In addition to Hungary not supporting the EU's common stance on Ukraine, it also regularly opposes our country's accession to the European Union. But let's get back to the SBU's exposure. In short, this story was, of course, commented on in Hungary. That very Szijjártó. But listen to how he did it.
Budapest has not yet received any official notifications from Ukraine regarding the exposure of Hungarian military intelligence agents who were spying in the Zakarpattia region. In Ukraine, anti-Hungarian propaganda is often used, which in many cases has no basis whatsoever. If the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs receives any details or official information, it will be able to deal with it.
But the most interesting thing happened later. Just take a look at this footage. Right in the center of Budapest. On May 9th, Hungarian law enforcement officers harshly detained a Ukrainian citizen who had previously worked as a diplomat. He is being accused of espionage. Later, he and another diplomat were simply expelled from Hungary.
The latest campaign against the Hungarians has the same goal as the previous ones. We Hungarians want peace. We say no to war. We have never supplied weapons to Ukraine, and we will not do so. We have not allowed and will not allow ourselves to be drawn into this war.
Journalist Vitaly Hlahola shared details about who exactly one of the aforementioned diplomats was.
Detained in Budapest turned out to be the former First Secretary of the Embassy of Ukraine, Serhiy Oleksandrov. At present, he is not an active diplomat and is in Hungary as a private individual. It has been established that Oleksandrov owns 2 restaurants in Budapest.
The spokesperson for Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Heo Heitiki, responded to the Ukrainians' detention. This response deserves special attention.
Regarding the detention of a Ukrainian citizen in the center of Budapest, when the evidence runs out, a witch hunt begins. It is high time for the Hungarian authorities to put an end to this senseless anti-Ukrainian hysteria.
In other words, this act can only be described as a blatant provocation and an attempt to put pressure on Ukraine. Because the detention of an ordinary person, moreover a former diplomat, was carried out so publicly, so theatrically, with all the so-called special effects. Simply put, they are unhappy that they were kidnapped. And next comes another step from the Hungarian side. The country cancelled negotiations with Ukraine regarding national minorities, which had been scheduled for May 12th. And this action is also quite telling. So, without a doubt, this is a new escalation in Hungarian-Ukrainian relations. However, most experts agree on 2 points. First, this is to be expected, given Hungary's ties with Russia. But secondly, and more importantly, nothing changes globally for Ukraine. Hungary has always thrown a wrench in the works on Ukraine's path toward a European future. The good news is that Ukraine has begun to combat Hungarian agents in Zakarpattia, because, as experience shows, internal security is more important than the external posturing of certain EU representatives. What do you think? Why would Hungary want to spy on military facilities in Zakarpattia? Leave your comments. It'll be interesting to read them.
We've discussed more than once whether Ukraine could regain its nuclear status. We agreed that anything is possible if there's the will and, of course, the money. A lot of money because nuclear weapons, despite having the resources, capabilities, and expertise, are unbelievably expensive. Oh, and don't forget to add international laws which put a definitive end to any nuclear future for Ukraine. For now, at least. So why am I bringing this up? Amid the active discussion about Ukraine regaining nuclear weapons, experts decided to assess the chances of other countries acquiring nukes. As Mikhailo Honchar, president of the Center for Global Studies Strategy by Dumas, says, the real chances of developing nuclear weapons belong to technologically advanced and wealthy countries. There aren't many of them, but they do exist.
For technologically advanced countries such as South Korea, Turkey, or Japan, this is not a problem. Or for those who have vast amounts of money and can buy the technology, like Saudi Arabia or the UAE.
Moreover, the countries mentioned could achieve nuclear status in the coming years, or at most within a decade. So I have a logical question. What do you think, is the increase in the number of nuclear states a good thing or a bad thing? Write your thoughts in the comments. While American military aid is on pause, our European partners are helping not only to strike the Russians, but also to deceive them. According to the Times, in addition to real weapons, Britain is also sending assembled decoys to Ukraine that look like air defense systems and tanks. These mock-ups are very effective at distracting the Russians and forcing them to waste expensive munitions on targets that aren't actually there.
If the United Kingdom supplies Ukraine with 5 vehicles, up to 30 decoys will be sent along with them. These look just like the real thing, even from a distance of 25 meters.
Well, what can I say? Smart move. But in the Kremlin, they use mock tanks in parades to show off how cool and powerful they are. That's all for now. Give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. And then we'll definitely see each other again.